Grace Kimball stood in the grand marble foyer of the Lexington Hotel, clutching her tablet like a lifeline while wondering if the groom had actually lost his mind. The email had been clear. Hire a wedding planner for a ceremony in 3 months, spare no expense, make it perfect. What the email hadn't mentioned was that the bride seemed to be a complete mystery to everyone involved, including the groom's assistant who had set up this meeting. She smoothed down her navy blazer and checked her reflection in one of the ornate mirrors. At 26, she had planned exactly 43 weddings, each one more elaborate than the last. Her business, Kimball Events, had earned a reputation for turning dreams into reality, even when those dreams seemed impossible. But something about this particular job felt different, and she couldn't quite put her finger on why. The elevator chimed, and a man stepped out who made Grace forget how to breathe properly. He was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair that looked like he had run his hands through it one too many times that morning. His suit probably cost more than her car, tailored perfectly to broad shoulders and a lean frame. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a striking green that seemed to hold 1,000 thoughts at once. "Miss Kimball." His voice was deep, professional, and carried a weight of exhaustion that matched the slight shadows under his eyes. "That's me. You must be Ethan Lockwood." She extended her hand, proud that it didn't shake. His handshake was firm, warm, and over far too quickly. "Thank you for meeting me on such short notice. I know 3 months isn't much time." "I've worked with less," Grace said, following him to a private conference room off the lobby. "Though I have to admit, your assistant was a bit vague on some of the details. I'd love to meet your fiancée and get her vision for the day." Something flickered across Ethan's face, gone so quickly she might have imagined it. He gestured for her to sit at the polished mahogany table, then took the seat across from her instead of at the head of the table. "Interesting. That's actually part of what I need to discuss with you." He loosened his tie slightly, and Grace noticed his jaw was clenched. "The wedding is between my younger sister, Victoria, and her fiancé, Marcus Chen. I'm paying for it, organizing it, making sure it's everything she deserves." Grace blinked. "You're planning your sister's wedding. Our parents died 4 years ago, car accident on the Pacific Coast Highway." His voice was matter-of-fact, but his fingers drummed once against the table. "Victoria was 19, still in college. I'm her only family, and I promised I'd give her the wedding our mother always talked about. Victoria's been so focused on finishing medical school that she hasn't had time to plan, and honestly, neither of them have the funds for what I want to give them." The pieces clicked into place. Grace had heard of Ethan Lockwood before. Who hadn't? At 31, he had taken his father's struggling real estate development company and turned it into a billion-dollar empire. Lockwood Properties was behind half the luxury high-rises in the city, and the other half probably wished they were. "That's incredibly generous," Grace said softly. "What kind of wedding does Victoria want? That's why you're here." Ethan pulled out his phone and slid it across to her, showing a notes app filled with ideas. "She's mentioned things over the years. Roses, definitely roses. She loves classical music, wants something elegant but not stuffy. Marcus is more laid back, so we need to balance that. I have the budget, the connections, but I don't have the expertise or, honestly, the time to pull this together. My sister deserves perfect, Miss Kimball, and my assistant tells me you deliver perfect." Grace scrolled through the notes, her mind already spinning with possibilities. Garden venue, string quartet, vintage aesthetic with modern touches. I'll need to meet with them, of course, get a sense of their personalities, what their love story is. I can arrange that. Ethan leaned back, and for the first time, some of the tension seemed to ease from his shoulders. Victoria's doing her residency at Mercy General and Marcus works in environmental law. They're both busy, but they'll make time. And your budget? Grace asked, knowing this was always the awkward question. Unlimited. He said it like he was discussing the weather. I want my sister to have everything. The dress, the flowers, the venue, the food. Everything. Grace had worked with wealthy clients before, but unlimited was a word she rarely heard spoken with such certainty. I'll put together a preliminary proposal, but I should be upfront with you, Mr. Lockwood. My fee for a wedding of this caliber and timeline is $50,000 plus expenses. Done. He didn't even blink. When can you start? How about right now? Grace opened her tablet and pulled up her questionnaire. Tell me about Victoria, what makes her laugh, what makes her cry. If you're trusting me to create her perfect day, I need to know who she is. What followed was 2 hours of the most intense client meeting Grace had ever experienced. Ethan spoke about his sister with a fierce protectiveness and deep love that made Grace's chest ache. He told her about how Victoria had wanted to be a doctor since she was 8 years old, how she volunteered at free clinics every weekend, how she had met Marcus at an environmental protest rally and argued with him for an hour before agreeing to get coffee. She's stubborn, Ethan said, and the affection in his voice was unmistakable. Once she sets her mind on something, nothing stops her. She got that from our mother. And what did you get from your mother? Grace asked before she could stop herself. Ethan's expression softened. The belief that family is everything, that you protect the people you love, no matter what it costs you. Grace's phone buzzed with a reminder about her next appointment, and she realized with a start that the afternoon had disappeared. I should let you get back to work. I'll have a proposal to you by Friday, and we can set up a meeting with Victoria and Marcus for next week. I'll walk you out. Ethan stood, and Grace noticed he moved like an athlete, controlled and precise. They walked through the hotel lobby in comfortable silence, and when they reached the entrance, he turned to her. Thank you, Miss Kimball. I can already tell this was the right choice. Call me Grace, she said, then surprised herself by adding, and I promise we're going to give your sister a wedding she'll never forget. His smile transformed his entire face, and Grace felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. I'm counting on it. The next week passed in a blur of venue scouting, vendor calls, and late nights at her small office downtown. Grace had assembled what she called her dream team. Marco, her floral designer who could make magic with petals. Jennifer, the photographer who captured souls, not just faces. And David, the caterer who treated every meal like art. The meeting with Victoria and Marcus was scheduled for Tuesday evening at a small Italian restaurant near the hospital. Grace arrived early, reviewing her notes and trying not to think about the fact that Ethan would be there. She had checked her makeup 3 times in the car, which was ridiculous. This was a professional meeting. The fact that she hadn't been able to stop thinking about those green eyes and that unexpected smile was completely irrelevant. You must be Grace. A woman with dark curly hair and Ethan's eyes bounded up to the table, radiating energy despite the scrubs visible under her coat. I'm Victoria, and this is Marcus. Marcus was exactly what Grace expected from Ethan's description. Warm smile, kind eyes, and an easy manner that immediately put people at ease. They shook hands and Victoria slid into the booth, practically bouncing with excitement. I cannot believe my brother hired a wedding planner. Ethan thinks he can solve every problem by throwing money at it. Victoria's eyes sparkled with mischief. But between you and me, I've been secretly panicking about how to plan a wedding while working 80-hour weeks, so I'm thrilled you're here. Where is Ethan? Marcus asked, checking his phone. He said 6:30. Stuck in a meeting with the Planning Commission, Victoria said, rolling her eyes. That new development downtown is giving him headaches. He'll be here when he can. Grace tried to ignore the small disappointment that settled in her stomach. Well, let's get started. I want to hear everything. How did you two meet? What followed was a love story that made Grace believe in fate. Victoria had been protesting the demolition of a community garden, and Marcus had been the lawyer trying to find a legal way to save it. They had argued, agreed, argued some more, and somewhere between the legal briefs and the petition drives, they had fallen completely in love. He saved the garden, Victoria said, reaching for Marcus's hand. Found some obscure zoning law that protected it. I knew right then I was going to marry him. And I knew the moment she told me I was completely wrong about everything, Marcus added, grinning. How could I not love someone that passionate? Grace was taking notes when she felt someone slide into the booth beside her. The scent of expensive cologne and something uniquely masculine made her look up. Ethan had arrived, his tie loosened and his hair slightly messed, and he was close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Sorry I'm late, he said, his voice rumbling through her. The commission approved the project, so it was worth it. Congratulations, Grace managed, acutely aware of how the booth suddenly felt much smaller. We were just talking about Victoria and Marcus's love story. Oh, don't get Ethan started on that, Victoria teased. He threatened to sue Marcus the first time they met. I did not threaten, Ethan protested. I simply asked what his intentions were toward my sister. While standing in front of the door blocking his exit, Marcus added, but he was grinning. I appreciated it, actually. Showed how much he cares about you. The dinner continued with laughter, stories, and more details about what Victoria wanted for her wedding. Grace watched the dynamics between the three of them, seeing how Ethan's protective nature balanced with Victoria's independence, how Marcus brought a lightness that made them all relax. She filled pages with notes, ideas already forming into a vision she knew would be spectacular. It wasn't until dessert arrived that Victoria dropped a bomb that changed everything. There's something I need to tell you all, she said, her voice suddenly nervous. Marcus and I have been talking, and we've decided we want to get married at the community garden where we met. I know that probably complicates things, Grace, but it feels right. The community garden. Grace's mind immediately started problem-solving. Outdoor venue meant tents, weather contingencies, power sources, accessibility issues. But she could also picture it. String lights in the trees, roses everywhere, the intimacy of a place that meant something real to the couple. That's perfect, Grace said, already sketching ideas on her tablet. We can make that absolutely magical. She looked up to find Ethan watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You're not worried about the complications, he asked. Complications are just opportunities for creativity, Grace said. Besides, a wedding should be about the couple's story, not about what's easiest. If the garden is where their story began, that's where it should continue. Something passed between her and Ethan in that moment, a connection she felt down to her bones. Victoria was talking excitedly about the space, but Grace was caught in those green eyes, wondering why this man she barely knew made her feel so completely seen. The weeks that followed established a pattern. Grace needed to coordinate with Ethan for approvals, budgets, and logistics. What started as formal emails became text messages, which became phone calls that stretched longer than necessary. They met at venues, at vendor showrooms, at the garden itself, as Grace planned the layout. She learned that Ethan took his coffee black, that he was always exactly on time, and that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. He learned that she was passionate about details, that she had started her business with money saved from working 3 jobs through college, and that she believed every wedding should tell a story. "You really love this, don't you?" Ethan asked one afternoon as they stood in the garden, watching Marco place sample floral arrangements around the space. "I love being part of people's happiness," Grace admitted. "There's something magical about a wedding. It's this one perfect day where everyone comes together to celebrate love." "How could I not love that? My parents had their wedding here, actually," Ethan said quietly. "This garden was different then, smaller. But when Victoria told me she wanted to get married here, it felt right, like coming full circle." Grace turned to him, seeing the vulnerability in his expression. "You really miss them? Every day?" He shoved his hands in his pockets, looking around the garden. "I keep thinking they'd love Marcus, that my mom would be crying over Victoria's dress, that my dad would make some terrible joke during his father of the bride speech. Instead, it's just me, trying not to mess this up." Without thinking, Grace reached out and touched his arm. "You're not messing anything up. Victoria knows how much you love her. This whole wedding is proof of that." Ethan looked down at her hand on his arm, then back up at her face. The air between them felt charged with something Grace didn't want to name. She should move her hand. This was professional. She didn't date clients, had made that rule after a disaster early in her career. But Ethan wasn't technically her client, and the way he was looking at her made her forget every rule she had ever made. "Grace," he started, then his phone rang. The spell broke, and he stepped back to answer it. Grace busied herself with Marco, her heart racing and her mind spinning. This was a problem. A big, complicated, potentially career-destroying problem. Because somewhere between wedding planning and late-night phone calls, somewhere between watching him love his sister and seeing his rare smiles, Grace had started falling for Ethan Lockwood. The next few weeks were an exercise in self-control. Grace threw herself into the wedding preparations with single-minded focus. The garden was transformed with careful planning. A vintage-style pergola for the ceremony, round tables with rose centerpieces for the reception, string lights that would make the whole space glow like something out of a fairy tale. Victoria's dress was a vintage-inspired lace gown that made her look like a princess. Marcus's suit was classic and elegant. The cake was 5 tiers of buttercream perfection. The string quartet had learned all of Victoria's favorite pieces. Every detail was falling into place exactly as Grace had envisioned, but she couldn't stop noticing Ethan. The way he rolled up his sleeves when helping set up tables. The way he listened to Victoria's opinions even when he clearly disagreed. The way his eyes found Grace in every room, like he was making sure she was still there. It was a month before the wedding when everything changed. Grace was at the garden late one evening, doing a final walkthrough of the layout. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and she was so focused on her clipboard that she didn't hear anyone approach. "You're here late." Grace jumped, spinning to find Ethan standing a few feet away. He was in jeans and a casual button-down, looking more relaxed than she had ever seen him. "I could say the same to you," she said, pressing a hand to her racing heart. "You scared me. Sorry." He moved closer, looking around the garden. "I wanted to see it. Victoria keeps showing me pictures, but I needed to see the space myself." "What do you think?" Grace asked, suddenly nervous. "I think my sister is going to cry, Marcus is going to be speechless, and you're a miracle worker." He turned to face her fully. "Grace, this is beyond anything I imagined." The way he said her name made her shiver. The setting sun cast shadows across his face, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the intensity in his eyes. They were alone in the garden, surrounded by the flowers and lights that would soon celebrate someone else's love story, and Grace knew she was in trouble. "I should go," she said, but she didn't move. "Stay," Ethan said softly. "Just for a minute." He moved closer, and Grace's breath caught. She should step back. She should maintain professional distance. She should remember all the reasons this was a terrible idea. But when Ethan reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek, all those reasons evaporated. "I can't stop thinking about you," he said, his voice rough. "I know the timing is terrible. I know this is probably completely inappropriate, but Grace, I can't pretend any more that I don't feel this." "Ethan," she whispered, and it was both a warning and a plea. "Tell me you don't feel it too," he challenged. "Tell me I'm imagining this connection between us and I'll walk away right now." She couldn't tell him that. It would be a lie, and Grace had never been good at lying. Instead, she did something completely reckless. She rose on her toes and kissed him. The world tilted. Ethan's arms came around her, pulling her close, and the kiss deepened into something that felt like coming home and starting an adventure all at once. Grace had been kissed before, but never like this. Never with this intensity, this perfect rightness, this feeling that everything in her life had been leading to this exact moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted. "Me too," Grace said, then reality crashed back in. "But Ethan, this is complicated. I'm planning your sister's wedding. There are professional boundaries, and I don't want anything to mess up Victoria's day." "So we wait," Ethan said immediately. "We keep this professional until after the wedding, and then we see where this goes. Because Grace, I don't know what this is between us, but I know I want to find out." Grace wanted to agree. She wanted to be sensible and professional and careful. But standing in the garden with Ethan's arms around her, she also wanted to be honest. "I don't think I can pretend for a month that I don't feel this way about you." "Then don't pretend," Ethan said, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, the corner of her mouth. "Be with me. We'll be discreet. We won't let it affect the wedding planning, but Grace, I don't want to wait another day to be with you." It was reckless and impulsive and everything Grace normally wasn't. But she nodded, and when Ethan kissed her again, she kissed him back with everything she had. The next month was the happiest and most stressful of Grace's life. Publicly, she and Ethan remained professional. They had meetings, discussed details, coordinated with vendors. But privately, they stole moments together whenever they could. Ethan would show up at her office late at night with takeout and ideas for new projects he was working on. Grace would meet him at construction sites, wearing a hard hat and listening to him talk passionately about architecture and design. They had dinner at quiet restaurants across town, talked for hours about everything and nothing, and fell deeper into something that felt inevitable. "I think I knew the moment you walked into that hotel," Ethan admitted one night as they sat on his penthouse balcony, overlooking the city lights. "You had this determined look on your face, like you were ready to take on the world, and I thought, that's someone I need to know." "I thought you were going to be difficult," Grace confessed, snuggled against his side. "Rich, demanding, impossible to please. I was so wrong." "I am demanding," Ethan said, his lips quirking. "Ask anyone who works for me." "You're particular," Grace corrected. "There's a difference. You know what you want and you're not afraid to pursue it." She looked up at him. "I like that about you. What else do you like about me?" Ethan asked, clearly fishing for compliments. Grace laughed, poking him in the ribs. "You're confident without being arrogant. You're protective of the people you love. You listen when people talk, really listen. You make me feel like I'm the only person in the room." She paused, suddenly serious. "You make me feel seen, Ethan. Like all the parts of me, even the messy ones, are worth knowing." Ethan pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. "You are worth knowing, Grace Kimball. Every brilliant, stubborn, beautiful part of you." They kept their relationship quiet, but Victoria wasn't stupid. 2 weeks before the wedding, she cornered Grace at a dress fitting. "So, you and my brother," Victoria said casually, adjusting her veil in the mirror. Grace nearly dropped her tablet. "What?" "Please, I've seen the way he looks at you and the way you look at him." Victoria turned, her expression kind. "I'm not upset if that's what you're worried about. Actually, I think it's wonderful." "Victoria, I promise this hasn't affected my work on your wedding," Grace started, but Victoria held up a hand. "I know it hasn't. Everything is perfect, more than perfect. Grace, I've never seen my brother like this. Since our parents died, he's been so focused on taking care of me, on building the company, on just surviving. But with you, he's happy. Really happy. How could I be anything but thrilled about that?" Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "I really care about him. I know you do. And he really cares about you." Victoria hugged her, careful of the dress. "Just promise me one thing, don't hurt him. He acts tough, but he's got the biggest heart of anyone I know." "I promise," Grace said, meaning it with everything she had. The days before the wedding flew by in a chaos of final preparations. Grace barely slept, coordinating deliveries, confirming vendors, managing 1,000 tiny details that all had to come together perfectly. Ethan was equally busy with work, but he made time every day to check in, to make sure she was eating and sleeping and not running herself into the ground. "I'm fine," Grace insisted on the phone the night before the wedding. "Everything is ready. Tomorrow is going to be perfect." "I'm not worried about tomorrow," Ethan said. "I'm worried about you. You've been working non-stop for 3 months. "I'll rest after the wedding," Grace promised. "Right now, I need to make sure your sister has the day she deserves." "You've already done that," Ethan said softly. "Grace, no matter what happens tomorrow, you've given us something incredible. You've given Victoria her dream wedding, and you've given me something I didn't even know I was looking for." "What's that?" Grace asked, her heart full. "Hope," Ethan said simply. "Hope that there's more to life than just work and responsibility. Hope that I can have what Victoria and Marcus have. Hope that maybe, just maybe, I've found someone who makes everything better just by existing." Grace wiped away tears, overwhelmed by the emotion in his voice. "I love you," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I know it's fast and probably crazy, but Ethan, I love you." There was a pause, and for a horrible moment, Grace thought she had made a terrible mistake. Then Ethan's voice came through, thick with emotion. "I love you too, Grace. I've been wanting to say it for weeks. I love you, and tomorrow, after my sister's perfect wedding, I'm going to spend the rest of the night showing you exactly how much." The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, the kind of perfect weather that made Grace believe in miracles. She arrived at the garden before dawn, overseeing the final setup with her team. The florists arranged hundreds of roses, the caterers set up the kitchen tent, the musicians did sound checks, and slowly, magically, the garden transformed into something out of a dream. Victoria arrived mid-morning, glowing with happiness despite her pre-wedding nerves. Grace helped her into her dress, fixed her hair, and held her hands when she started to cry. "I wish Mom and Dad were here," Victoria whispered, staring at herself in the mirror. "They are here," Grace said gently. "In every flower, every detail, every person who loves you. And Victoria, they would be so proud of the woman you've become." Victoria hugged her tightly. "Thank you for everything." The ceremony was scheduled for late afternoon, when the light would be golden and perfect. Grace moved through her duties on autopilot, checking and rechecking everything, making sure every single detail was flawless. She saw Ethan across the garden, handsome in his dark suit, helping Marcus with his tie and probably giving him last-minute brotherly advice. Their eyes met across the space, and even surrounded by chaos, Grace felt that connection snap into place. Tonight, she thought. Tonight, everything would be different. The ceremony was everything Grace had dreamed it would be. The string quartet played as guests took their seats. The bridesmaids walked down the aisle in soft pink dresses. And then Victoria appeared, walking alone toward Marcus, her face radiant with love. Grace had insisted on a private moment before the ceremony for what Victoria had called the most important walk of my life. Ethan had walked his sister from the preparation tent to the beginning of the aisle, had kissed her forehead and whispered something that made her cry and laugh at the same time, and then had stepped back to let her walk herself down the aisle. "I don't need someone to give me away," Victoria had told Grace when planning this moment. "I'm choosing Marcus and he's choosing me. That's what matters." It was beautiful and modern and perfectly them. Grace watched Marcus's face as Victoria walked toward him, saw the pure love and joy there, and felt her own eyes fill with tears. This was why she did this job. These moments of perfect happiness, where love was the only thing that mattered. The vows were personal and heartfelt. Marcus promised to always fight for what was right and to always come home to Victoria. Victoria promised to challenge him, support him, and love him through everything life brought. When they kissed, the garden erupted in applause and cheers. The reception was exactly what Grace had envisioned. The food was incredible, the music was perfect, and the atmosphere was magical. Grace moved through the crowd, managing small issues that guests never noticed, making sure everything flowed seamlessly. She was coordinating the cake cutting when she felt a hand on her lower back. She turned to find Ethan beside her, looking at her with such open affection that it made her breath catch. "Dance with me," he said. "Ethan, I'm working," Grace protested weakly. "Everything is perfect. Your team has it under control. Dance with me, Grace." She let him lead her onto the dance floor, acutely aware of all the eyes on them. But when his arms came around her and they started to sway to the music, everything else faded away. "Thank you," Ethan said softly, his lips close to her ear, "for giving Victoria this day. For making everything so perfect, for being exactly who you are." "Thank you for trusting me," Grace replied, "and for being patient with all my neurotic planning tendencies." Ethan laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. "I love your neurotic planning tendencies. I love how you care about every detail. I love how passionate you are about your work." He pulled back slightly to look at her face. "I just love you, Grace." Around them, Grace was dimly aware that people were watching, that Victoria was grinning like she had won the lottery, that Marcus was laughing. But she didn't care. She rose on her toes and kissed Ethan right there in front of everyone, pouring everything she felt into that kiss. When they broke apart, the garden erupted in applause and whistles. Victoria ran over, hugging them both. "Finally, I've been waiting for you two to stop being subtle." "Subtle?" Marcus asked. "Victoria, you literally bet me $50 they'd kiss before the end of the night. And I was right." Victoria crowed, then turned to Grace. "I'm so happy for you both. You deserve this." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of happiness. Grace managed to both do her job and stay close to Ethan, stealing touches and glances that promised everything for later. When Victoria and Marcus left in a shower of rose petals, driving off toward their honeymoon, Grace finally allowed herself to relax. Her team handled the breakdown, shooing her away when she tried to help. "You've been working non-stop for 3 months," Jennifer said firmly. "Go be with your billionaire. We've got this." Ethan was waiting by his car, having changed into jeans and a sweater. He looked younger, more relaxed, and when he saw her, his smile lit up the night. "Come home with me," he said, not a question but a request. Grace didn't hesitate. She got in the car, and Ethan drove them back to his penthouse. Their hands linked the entire way. In the elevator up to his floor, he kissed her like a man starving, and Grace kissed him back with equal hunger. His penthouse was modern and sleek, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. But Grace barely noticed the view. She was too focused on Ethan, on the way he looked at her like she was everything, on the way his hands trembled slightly as he reached for her. They made love slowly, carefully, learning each other with a tenderness that brought tears to Grace's eyes. Ethan was gentle and passionate, and afterward, holding her against his chest, he whispered promises into her hair about a future Grace had barely let herself dream about. "Stay," he said, "not for the night but for always," and Grace knew exactly what he meant. "I'm not going anywhere," she promised. The next few months were a whirlwind of change. Grace's business exploded with new clients after Victoria's wedding photos spread across social media. Everyone wanted the planner who had created such magic, and Grace found herself with a waiting list that stretched into the following year. But she also found herself with Ethan, and that was the best change of all. He integrated into her life seamlessly, showing up at her office with lunch, helping her scout venues, listening to her talk through problems with an attention that made her feel valued and heard. She integrated into his life just as easily, attending business dinners at his side, offering opinions on his projects, becoming friends with Victoria and Marcus. Ethan's sister and her new husband became fixtures in their lives, double dates and family dinners that felt like the family Grace had always wanted. 6 months after Victoria's wedding, Ethan took Grace back to the community garden. It had been restored to its original purpose after the wedding, a beautiful green space in the middle of the city. He led her to the spot where Victoria and Marcus had exchanged vows, where string lights still hung in the trees. "This place is special," Ethan said, holding both of Grace's hands. "This is where my parents got married. This is where Victoria and Marcus started their forever. And Grace, this is where I want to start ours." He dropped to one knee, pulling out a velvet box. Inside was a ring that made Grace's heart stop, a vintage setting with a perfect diamond, elegant and timeless. "Grace Kimball, you planned your way into my life, and now I can't imagine my life without you. You've shown me what it means to truly love someone, to be partners in everything. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you've made me?" Grace was crying, nodding before he even finished the question. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." The ring slid onto her finger perfectly, and Ethan stood to kiss her, both of them laughing and crying and holding each other like they would never let go. "I have a question, though," Grace said when she could finally speak. "Who's going to plan our wedding?" Ethan laughed, that full, joyous sound she loved so much. "I was thinking maybe we'd do it together. After all, you're the expert, but I have pretty good taste." "Together," Grace agreed. "I like the sound of that." Their wedding, when it happened a year later, was a perfect blend of both of them. Held at the garden where Ethan had proposed, with both elegant details and personal touches that told their story. Victoria stood as Grace's maid of honor, having become not just a client's sister, but one of Grace's closest friends. Marcus was Ethan's best man, and his speech about how Ethan had threatened him at their first meeting, but how that protectiveness was actually one of his best qualities, had everyone laughing through tears. Grace walked down the aisle in a dress she had designed with her favorite designer, toward a man who looked at her like she hung the moon. When they exchanged vows, promising to love, honor, and plan for whatever life brought them, Grace felt like everything in her life had led to this moment. 2 years later, Grace stood in the nursery of their new home, a beautiful brownstone Ethan had renovated himself, rocking their daughter, Eleanor Rose. Named after Ethan's mother, she had his green eyes and what Grace suspected would be her stubborn determination. Ethan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around both of them. "She's beautiful," he whispered, kissing Grace's temple. "She is," Grace agreed, looking down at their sleeping baby, "just like her daddy promised." "I promised you a lot of things," Ethan said softly. "A life full of love. A partnership in everything. A family. You've kept every promise," Grace said, leaning back against him. "And then some." Their business, because it had become their business, was thriving. Ethan had partnered with Grace to create Lockwood Kimball Events, a full-service planning and venue company that combined his real estate expertise with her planning genius. They had just opened their third venue, a restored historical building that was already booked for 2 years. But more than business success, they had built a life together. A life full of love, laughter, family dinners with Victoria and Marcus and their new baby boy, and moments of quiet joy like this one. "You ever think about that first day?" Ethan asked, still holding them both. "When you walked into that hotel thinking you were planning some random wedding?" "I think about it all the time," Grace admitted. "I think about how I had no idea that job would change my entire life, how I couldn't have known that the man hiring me would become my everything." "I knew," Ethan said. "Maybe not right away, but pretty quickly. You walked in with your tablet and your determined expression, and something in me just knew you were going to be important." Grace turned in his arms, careful not to wake Alina. "I love you, Ethan Lockwood. Thank you for hiring me. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for this life." "I love you, Grace Lockwood," Ethan replied, and even after years together, the sound of her married name still made her heart flutter. "Thank you for planning your way into my life and never leaving." They kissed over their sleeping daughter, surrounded by the life they had built together, in the home they had made, living the happily ever after that Grace had spent her career creating for others, but never quite believed she would find for herself. But she had found it, or maybe it had found her, walking into a hotel lobby 3 years ago with a tablet and a dream, and no idea that she was about to plan the most important event of her life, her own love story. Outside, the city lights twinkled like the string lights in the garden where everything had begun. Inside, the Lockwood family stood together, 3 hearts beating as one, proof that sometimes the best things in life are the ones you never saw coming. Grace had spent her career believing in love, in magic, in happily ever after. Now she was living it, and it was better than anything she could have ever planned.